All right, welcome to today's webinar Wednesday, Lead and Copper Rule Revisions, Service Line Inventories, and Idaho's Inventory Template. My name is Tondi Clark. I am the training coordinator for Idaho Rural Water Association. We are pleased to have Cassandra Lemons as our speaker. Cassandra is currently the Drinking Water Bureau Compliance and Enforcement Supervisor. She is tasked with overseeing the lead and copper rules revisions compliance in Idaho. She has experience performing regulatory oversight of a variety of facilities. Cassandra has a short time today. If you still have questions at the end of this hour, please write them in your course evaluation and we will get back to you. I will now turn the time over to Cassandra.
Thanks, Tondi. Can everybody hear me? Hope so.
I can.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. So before we really get rolling, I just want to express my gratitude to Idaho Rural Water and the work that they do. I think their work is critical to the success of all of our small and very small systems, and so we very much appreciate the work that their staff put in. And then also I want to give a shout out to our DEQ partners and health district partners. I don't know if any of them are on this call, but they definitely don't hear it enough, but we appreciate the work that they and the service that they give to our citizens. And then finally to all of you, because without you, none of us can achieve the goal of clean and safe drinking water. And so, you know, the one thing that separates us from third world countries is clean and safe drinking water. So the work you do is critical. Thank you for everything you do, and just keep on keeping on. And like Tondi mentioned, this is a big class. I know there are a lot of questions surrounding the lead copper rule revisions and all of the requirements and some of the myths that were floating around. And so I want you all to know that that's not gone unheard. We know there's a lot of need out there. We know there are a lot of questions. For the purposes of this training, we are going to simply be focusing on the template, how to fill it out. We're not going to do a deep dive into some of the specifics. That's going to come a little bit later. So if you have questions that are unrelated to the template, definitely send those later. But if you have questions that are related to the template, you can put them in chat. I think that's probably preferred, because if we have 50 people unmuting and trying to talk all at once, I don't know that we'll be able to address your questions that way. So it's preferred to put your question in the chat and we'll try to answer it as we go along. All right, so with that, I'm putting a link in the chat. This link is the EPA inventory guidance that they issued in August of this year. And so that guidance really is a big driver on how we decided to finalize this template. And so one thing that I want you all to know is this template is required. You cannot submit anything else to us for this initial inventory. The reason for that is there are a lot of weird nuances in the rule, and we didn't want you all trying to figure out how to put those together in a format that was readable and usable and then submit to us. Additionally, what we needed was something for our compliance staff, because there are requirements for us when these come in, to be able to look at it, have a consistent format, and not be trying to interpret everyone's abbreviations and everyone's terminologies. And so we needed something that was consistent that we could implement statewide. So I will be referring somewhat to the EPA guidance document that is in, again, that link is in the chat. So please, if you want, go ahead and open that up, and then we'll take a hard look at this inventory template. First and foremost, I mean, you should be aware that there is an instruction sheet. It's the last tab in the entire template, and it's not a line-by-line instruction sheet. That kind of information, I think, is a little more challenging to put together in a format that is not going to be 50 pages long. And so the intent here is to give you some brief instructions, but I actually built in a lot of the instructions that you're going to need as you go along into the template itself, and I'll show you that here when we get there. But anyway, so this first tab here, or this first row, is just some general information about the template. Again, as I mentioned, you're required to use this template to submit your initial inventory to us. We can't accept any others, and there is room in this sheet or in this template for you to add some columns for some other information that you might want to include as part of the inventory. The other thing to keep in mind, many of the cells are completely locked. You cannot make any changes to a big portion of this template, and that was intended to protect the formulas and those the little instructions that I built into the template. The summary information sheet, which is this first tab here, is general information about the water system, and it will contain, the summary for the service line inventory. You'll note here there are locked cells as well. Don't think your form isn't working just because your cells are locked. Just be aware that that's intentional to prevent you from modifying those formulas used to calculate that reporting information, which is critical to being able to successfully submit your inventory to us. The next tab in the template is the inventory sheet. You'll see here, this is the line-by-line entry of the public water system and private side service line materials. We'll talk a little bit more about, yes, it'll be 163 pages was the EPA guidance, which is why I don't ask you to go through it and understand it, but I used it to help guide this document. So yeah, thanks for that. And then one thing you have to be aware of is because of the formulas that are built into the sheet, when you print, Excel thinks that there's information in all of those cells and will print every single page. I think it's something on order of about 65,000 pages. Please be cautious when you print and select the area that you want to print. And I'll show you guys how to do that here a little bit later. Did I blip out? It says my internet connection is unstable. I think I'm still here. So with respect to the information that you're required to provide to us, one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is we do need locational specific information for every single service line. It's also included for any lines that are not serving consumers, such as for fire flow or irrigation, but are connected to the culinary or the drinking water system. That's a key provision right there. One of the caveats that EPA gave was that if that line could ever be used or converted to drinking water, we need to know the status of the I apologize. I was trying to read the comment there, Adriana, and I got sidetracked on what I was going to say. So anyway, the intent there is that if you have a service line that is connected to the culinary system, it could be later down the road converted to be part of the drinking water system. That's happened actually in the past, so make sure that you're including those. If it's an irrigation system that's completely separate from your drinking water system, you do not have to include that in the inventory. The same would be true for like a fire flow if you had a separate well that was not part of the culinary system and it serves some sort of fire storage or some other appurtenances for that. So keep that in mind. You don't have to include every single non-serving customer's line, but be aware if it's connected to the main part of the system, you need to be including that. There are columns that are not necessarily required, but make sure you provide enough information to adequately identify the materials and the information regarding each individual connection. There is one column in there that is completely not editable, but as you start filling out the inventory, you'll notice that it's going to fill in with some stuff. That particular column has a pretty hefty formula in it, and so that is definitely a protected column. And then G through O, we really need to fill in those because some of those categories are going to be important down the line for future portions of the regulation. I can't speak directly to how that's going to look when EPA moves forward with the lead copper rule improvements. And then here I've added the contact information for your regional or health district offices. So keep that in mind, that you can contact those folks and they can provide some assistance to you in addressing your questions. If they don't have answers, they'll reach out to me. You're always welcome to reach out to me directly, and Tondi can send out my contact information if she hasn't already. Okay. One more thing I wanted to mention is, I know this is a big lift for many of you. It seems daunting. My advice is to focus on what you know and worry about what you don't know a little bit later. I think once you start focusing on what you know, you may find that it's not such a daunting task. Okay, and look around you. There's 136 of us in this room, so you're not alone. There's a lot of folks out there in the same boat as you. Okay, so to the summary information page. This page is, as I mentioned before, specific details that are important to satisfy portions of the rule. So the first thing we definitely need to know is what your public water system ID number is. So you can see here that there's this little pop-up box. It just tells you what it is you're supposed to put in this field. So it always begins with ID to denote that we're in Idaho, and then it should be a 7-digit number after that. If you're new and don't know what that number is, let us know. We can help you make sure you know that. This is the public water system name. This is the name of your water system as it appears in our records. This is important to help make that connection. It's not necessarily critical that it be exact. Like, for example, if you say City of Twin Falls and we have Twin Falls, City of, that's okay. City of Twin Falls is just fine for that. If your name that you call yourself is extraordinarily different from the way it appears in DEQ records, you should reach out to your compliance staff to see how to get that resolved, because that, we don't want it to be drastically different. For example, if your HOA was sold and now they're calling themselves Gold Canyon Mine instead of Rock Creek Estates, we would want to make sure that our records reflect the new name. Service line ownership. So this one has been a little bit of confusion. So basically what we need to know is, do you have service lines that are wholly owned by the public water system? You have service lines that are wholly owned by the private or the customer, or do you have a combined situation? I can tell you most generally you will have combined. There are going to be a few instances where perhaps the public water systems own all of the service connections. RV parks come to mind, or some HOAs might be in that situation. So we just want to know what kind of service line inventory we can expect. And so just let us know general information about the ownership for your system. This date is the date of the inventory. So it may not necessarily reflect the day you submit it. I mean, for example, if you get it done the day before it's required to be submitted to us, you put that date in here. The important part here is that later on, you'll be required to submit updates to your inventory. And so we'll want to be able to chase those dates. So we will be comparing the date of the inventory that we had that was submitted versus the date of the inventory you're submitting today. So make sure you update that periodically as you're making those updates. This next field, this is an important category for us, because we need to know who to reach out to if we have specific questions regarding the inventory. I can't predict right now what those questions might be, but you want to put the appropriate person in there. So, for example, if you are the designated operator, you may or may not be the right person to be the point of contact for information regarding the inventory. I mean, it's going to be system specific, so it will depend on who developed it and who the water system decides to designate as that contact person. For some of you, it might be your GIS folks. There could be an environmental compliance officer in your system, or it could just be you. So you might be the person on the hook for answering your questions about the inventory. I put a title in. It's optional. If it's important to you and you want it filled out, feel free. Otherwise, you can leave it blank. Give us a phone number so we know how to get in touch with you, whether it's a direct line or a general business line or a cell phone line. I don't care. Just depends on how you want someone to contact you. Same with email. You don't necessarily have to put both of these in there, but if your preferred method of contact is email and you don't want people calling you, don't put your phone number down. Just put your email down. That information is really at your discretion. Inventory availability. If you are a public water system and you serve more than 50,000 persons, you are required to make your inventory available on your website. If you serve fewer, if you're at that 50,000 or less, you have to provide a location, a physical location where the inventory is publicly accessible. For some of you, that might be a public works building, maybe the public library, I don't know. If you are an HOA and you don't necessarily have a like an office location, you can designate an address. There are a couple of other options that we're exploring right now. We're looking at how to host inventories. So when you submit them to us, they turn around and are publicly accessible. We don't have that in place yet. We don't even have approval to put that in place. And so that's still up in the air. So don't bank on that happening. Make sure you're prepared to have somewhere where the public can ask to view that service line inventory. How are you defining service line? So there is a definition for service line in the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's basically the line that comes from the main to the point where it enters the premise. Does that help, Doug? Okay. This is an aside. We are working on a fact sheet that actually gives the definition of service line. And as soon as I can get approval for that, I will get that out to you folks as well. The wheels of government turn very slowly. So we're working on some more things on our side. Does that mean property line? It depends. If the house sits on the property line and that's where the service line enters the house, I would say yes. Some of this information we'll talk about a little bit more about down the road, but there are some provisions in the guidance document that will answer some of these questions. So hold that thought, Shane. I promise I'll get to you in just a second. Inventory summary. So this section is automatically calculated from the inventory sheet. So you can see here, these are all zeros. And so these are the specific categories that EPA is requiring as the initial reporting. So these are the 4 categories that we will be required to upload to the federal database as part of the reporting requirements. And so these are formulas that are automatically calculated, so you don't have to do anything here. And this total connections is a metric for our compliance staff to kind of do a quick check and look and see how many service lines or service connections that we list in our current compliance database versus how many you're reporting here. And so you'll probably be asked to explain if there are significant discrepancies. If it's onesie, twosies, that will be up to the individual compliance staff, because we recognize that it can be dynamic for rapidly growing systems. Okay. Inventory sheet. This is the bread and butter, right? This is where you all really care. So let's just start from the left-hand side and move our way over to the right. So this section right here, A, B, C, D, and E, are optional, but you have to give at least one specific locational information for each service line. So the tricky part is determining whether or not the physical address is what you want to use. Do you want to use the parcel number? Parcel number can get tricky if you have multiple service lines on a single parcel. Lot, block, and subdivision are certainly something you can include to help you all track. For some of the smaller systems, most of this is going to not really apply to you. Now, the one thing here that you should be aware of is what you report to us versus what you make publicly available can be two different things. If a local code or ordinance prevents the publication of physical addresses, you don't have to make the physical address piece publicly available, but you still have to be able to give enough information so that we can discern whether or not these are individual units or individual houses. And yes, you can use a GIS number as a location. The one thing I would caution with that is that sometimes you're going to run into situations where if you have multiple service lines in one small location, it's going to be hard to split those out unless you have some pretty high grade equipment. Not saying it's not doable, just saying keep that in mind that if you show one location, but there are 4 service lines, you're going to have to be able to note that somehow that there are 4 units or whatever tied to that GIS number. And what you would do is you would add that here. So you maybe would put latitude here and longitude here, and you could put those there. And then you would want to make sure that you know how you're reporting that, so that if your compliance officer reaches out and says, hey, I want to check in with you on this, you can explain what you put here. So again, you don't have to fill out all of these columns, but we have to have enough information to ensure that you are reporting the service line materials inventory for each individual service line. And these are the most common metrics for that. But we do recognize that GIS is really coming along. I had another fellow ask about meter numbers. If you have meter numbers that are identifiable by location, you can do that. The only thing I would caution you on is that if you have, for example, an apartment complex and you're using meter numbers, but there's only one service line, but there are multiple meters, like it splits inside the building somehow, that would be one service line, but you could still tie it to those multiple meters. Just make sure that you understand how you're reporting that, so it doesn't look like you're reporting, substantially more service connections than you actually have. Okay. Let's see. Make sure that you include anything that's unoccupied or vacant. So if you currently don't have a customer, so there's a water service to an old building that perhaps hasn't been in use for some time, we still need the service line inventory for that, unless, of course, that building is slated for demolition or something like that, and there won't be a service connection there anymore. If it were me and I was doing this, I know it's a headache, but I would still document that, because you just never know what the future holds completely. And what we don't want to do is put a whole bunch of work in now and realize there was a bunch more that we had information for that we didn't provide that we need now. Lines to abandoned wells. If the well's properly abandoned and no longer available for use, I don't know that you would need to include those service lines, because I'm assuming that there won't be any water service to them anymore. Yeah, that's a great question, but I'd say if they're actually truly properly abandoned, they've been filled with bentonite and you can't use them anymore, pumps pulled, there's no power to it, I would say no, you don't necessarily need to include that, because those lines will be served by a different water source at this point. If the well's not been properly abandoned and could be used, you should include those lines as well. Let's see, I do have some notes here, so give me a second. I want to make sure that I hit all the main points. Okay, I think that covers all of that stuff. Okay, so if you're looking for specific information in that guidance regarding the locational information, chapter 2 is your go-to for that, and it's pages 30 and 31 contain most of that information that I just talked about with respect to that locational information. Now I'm gonna skip F because this is the one, again, like I said, is completely uneditable. You can't do anything, which is why I highlighted it in blue, which is another reason if you just hit print and walk away, you're going to get a million pages because it's going to print the whole thing because there's information in the cells. And so, so somebody asked, let's see, I want to make sure I got the question right. Splitting utility line versus customer line, or just counting them as one. Okay, so Shane, and I'm sure others have this question. We need, if you have a combined situation, just like on the front page, where this particular service line has combined ownership, you need to report out the materials on both sides. The most likely scenario that I see is you might know what's on your side. Say, you know, it's, I don't know, it's ductile. I'm making guesses here. It's ductile iron, but on that private side, you're probably not going to know, right? So that's going to be the most common scenario that many of you are going to fall into. But what this does is in the guidance on page 26, there's a table that basically says we are going to choose the most restrictive or most hazardous category as the driving overall service line category. So if even the private side is unknown, say, I don't know how many service connections you have, if they're all unknown, all of these are going to be unknown unless you select, like if I choose lead here instead, but I choose unknown here, it's going to default to lead because that's the most hazardous scenario for that service connection. And so as you go down and fill this out, say you've got a copper line. I know this isn't true to life. You'll probably have a little more consistency. But then we have a galvanized. It's going to default to non-lead. Because remember, on this page, the summary information page, I only need these 4 categories. So anything that fell into that non-lead service line is going to be counted amongst these non-leads. I don't need to know here if it's copper or if it's ductile iron or whatever other category. It could be PVC. But you can also see that we're getting counts now. So we have 1 lead service line. We have 0 galvanized requiring replacement. We have 1 with a lead status unknown, and then we have 1 that's non-lead with a total of 3 connections. So as you go along, you can't mess these up. Like I can't type in it. If I hit enter, it says, nope, you can't do that. You got to retry. So again, your sheet is not broken. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and it's forcing you to choose in the drop down. And so as you go along and you get further down, these pop-ups with the information still keep showing up in every box, because I don't know about you, but I get annoyed when I get about to line, 4,000 and I can't remember what I was supposed to do. So I got to flip back to another page and then go back to this page and hope I can find my place. Great question. Difference between galvanized and galvanized requiring replacement. Galvanized requiring replacement is a galvanized line that is or was downstream of a lead service line, or if it is downstream of an unknown situation. So again, this is the worst case scenario. So if it's galvanized and you know that it was never downstream of a lead service line, then you can indicate that it's galvanized, but it's not galvanized requiring replacement. If it was downstream of a lead service line, or you don't know if it was ever downstream, you have to categorize it as galvanized requiring replacement. Evan, if we know the material of a few properties, but we don't know all of them, can we assume service line material based off of known service line materials? Sure. I don't see anything wrong with that. I definitely make sure that you are putting together documentation that can support those decisions. And I'll talk just a little bit more about that as we move along. But one of the things that's going to future-proof your system is putting together that documentation. So if down the road there's ever a question, either in your mind or in anybody else's mind, you have that justification for why you chose the category that you chose. And I can tell you, all of our compliance staff are looking at this from the perspective of this initial service line inventory that you're going to submit is going to be imperfect. right? There's going to be areas where we might have an entire column or a big chunk of the column is unknown. We understand that. And so nobody's going to, there's no, I don't know, additional violations or points for having a whole bunch of unknowns. The caution here in choosing unknown is make sure you really don't know. Like, don't just say, you know what, this is too much work, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to call them all unknown. Because under the lead copper rule revision right now today, oh, sure, Adriana, let me see what I can do. Is that better? Fabulous. Okay. So the cautionary tale for designating unknown is that if you have a lead exceedance and you have a whole bunch of unknowns, those count towards the required percentage for the replacement of lead service lines. So that's one of the pieces why you want to make sure that if you really don't know, and there are some ways to get at this information. We're going to talk about a few of them. And so in plastic, same as poly, yes, plastic and poly are somewhat synonymous. And then is lead gooseneck considered a lead service line? It depends. If there is, so typically goosenecks under EPA's guidance are 2 feet or shorter. Now, that being said, I've heard tell out there are goosenecks that are far longer than that. So really it's just about you deciding what the definition for your water system of a lead gooseneck is. Now, I wouldn't go down the rabbit hole of calling the actual service line a gooseneck, just to get out of calling it a lead service line. But definitely, take a hard look at that. If all of your goosenecks are 3 feet, then I would say they're goosenecks, right? But if you have most of them are 2 feet, and then you run into something that's like 10 feet, perhaps, maybe that's extreme. I don't really know. You may consider calling that a lead service line just as a metric of protection for you and your water system. Okay, I'm going to jump back and talk a little bit more about these service line categories and some of the information that you can use to determine what they are. In the guidance document, if you go to chapters 4, chapters 5, they talk a lot about strategies for determining those service lines. So, of course, one strategy that I hear a lot about is the horror story of now I have to dig up on every single service line, on every single customer, on my side and their side to do this inventory. No, you don't. And please don't. Don't just start digging because the expense there is astronomical. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you understand where your access authority lies, right? Because you don't want to get into a situation where you're trespassing on private side. So don't get yourself in that position. I don't know all of the city and county rules and ordinances. And so it would be on you to have an understanding of whether or not you even have authority to access that private side, whether you need to ask permission, or I don't know, maybe you own more than you think you do. So one place to look is first find out if you can even access, right? So don't just go trespassing. Definitely want to look at historical records. Those are pretty powerful. And if you have a, your records, if they're like all of ours, as you go further back in time, they get sketchier and sketchier. I get that. But like I said before, focus on the known. Okay, so if you have subdivisions that are in process right now of they're out there developing the roads and putting in the mains right now, are those going to be lead service lines? The answer is no, they're not. And so that's a great way to really get your inventory started, right? You can just go in, and even if you don't have those physical address numbers, you can put in lot, block, subdivision, or parcel numbers, or however your county sets that up for you initially. And you can just fill in that information, and you can just go right down and just click that they're not lead all the way down. And then you're going to say, well, we developed it in 2022. And so that's a valid look at your records. The other piece is consider if you have tap cards available to you, if you have plumbing inspection records available to you. I can tell you, I did meet with the Plumbing Bureau, and their inspection process did not require the inspector to document the material type. That doesn't mean they didn't necessarily, but he also indicated that their records may or may not contain what you're looking for, but he's happy to help assist wherever he can. And so if it looks like something that all 1,000 of our water systems are going to submit public records requests, let's work together on that, because we might be able to garner something that is a little more easy for them and for you, rather than just submitting those public records requests. But also, DEQ has a large volume of records over time as plans and specs and facility plans, those master plans that you all love putting together. You can submit that a public records request to us if you have gaps in your records and you're like, I know that existed somewhere. You can check and see if we have those records. We do have an online public record request submittal, so you can just go online and submit what you're looking for. Again, I can't promise that the information you seek is there, but it is an avenue for you to look at. So some of those old plans were great. Those old hand-drawn ones, man, they put a lot of information on those. So don't discount those as a source for your records review. Some of the other information in Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, some of those other investigation methods are visual, right? So you're out working, you have a crew already digging up out there, I don't know, you're redoing a main or something, or you had something break, you've got a leak and they're working on it. They've already got the ground open up. If they happen to be where they can visually verify that service line material, then I would recommend that all of your boots on the ground have those little tiny spiral notebooks and a pencil in their pocket, and that you're asking them to document that. For you folks that are a lot smaller and probably aren't performing as much maintenance, I know that's a little more challenging. But again, any opportunity that you have to visually verify is a great start. So let's see, what if the service line is two different types of materials, such as copper and galvanized? You would probably want to pick again, the most restrictive scenario. And so I would choose galvanized, but again, be cautious and make sure that you know whether or not it's galvanized, or if it's galvanized requiring replacement. And then Chad says, a lot of meters are set in copper setter, which ends downstream, copper union. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can engage the customer and how you can find out what's beyond that union. No, you don't necessarily need pictures to provide evidence of what you found, but pictures never hurt you, right? Because if you're ever questioning yourself, one good story that I like to tell is we were talking to another state and they told us a story about using inspection and tap cards. And there was one pile that they received that looks like they had a really, really, really terrible lead problem. There were stacks and stacks of cards that they thought had L as the material. And so they went out potholing only to discover those were all copper. And so the gentleman who was filling those cards out, his C's were a little bit lazy, and so they looked like L's. So pictures would have really helped in that case to avoid them having to go out and pothole as much as they did. For newer water systems constructed after 2000, there are no lead service lines. Does the overall service line? Yes. Every single service line for every single connection for every single community and non-transient, non-community water system is required to list a service line by service line inventory to us. There is an option for smaller systems down the road when they're supposed to provide an update to certify that there were no changes. But yeah, everybody's required to submit this line by line inventory to us. Does that answer your question, Bob? Did I miss any questions so far? I don't think so. Okay, so there's options such as that visual investigation. So another strategy that some other states used is to engage the consumer or the customer and ask them to look, give them some tools. There's a couple of websites out there that provide some good information on how to determine whether you're looking at lead or are you looking at galvanized or copper, because not everybody knows, right? You guys look at that stuff and you have a pretty good idea of what you're looking at, but not everybody understands that. And so there is information out there. On page 55 in the guidance document is part of chapter 5, and then on page 59 there is a link to an EPA website that gives some of that information that you can utilize in aiding you in helping your customers make that determination. I realize you're placing a lot of faith in the information that they provide you, and that's okay. Again, we know this is an imperfect process, and all we expect is that you do the very best that you can and not just throw your hands in the air and say, well, everything's just going to be unknown and I'll deal with it down the road. Because again, that's a very dangerous place to put yourself in. There are other states who engaged their consumers and just asked for permission. Hey, can I come into your house and look? There's a link in the earlier chat for the EPA guidance document. Kay Leonard. So if you search your chat box way up when we got started, there's a link. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways you can do that. Some cities incentivize. So if they sent out, self-identification cards, and if folks sent it back, they got put in for a drawing. Inventory is due October 16th of 2024. So you can incentivize that, put in for a drawing, or I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could come up with it. It really depends on your water system. It depends on, what resources are available to you. And I know for everybody right now, resources are pretty limited. There's closed circuit TV. There are sampling protocols. If you go to page 65 through 66, it talks a little bit about how to determine using multiple liter sampling, whether or not you're getting service line water versus home plumbing. Yes, Joe, you can use customer verified under that, but you're going to have to provide some documentation on how you obtain that information. So make sure that you compile that and be prepared to present it to your compliance staff. And then there's, of course, excavation, which is exceedingly expensive. So, I would caution, perhaps consider that as a more last ditch effort. And maybe not even a consideration for your water system at all. I don't know. It really depends on you. There are what are called predictive models. There are some considerations if you're looking at some of these newer technologies. Predictive modeling is a pretty good place to start for some systems. For other systems, it might be a non-starter, because if you don't have any records to put into the process to build the model, you're gonna have a really bad model output. And so basically it's just a mathematical process for determining the probability that you will find lead in a given area, again, based on the information that you provide. Are there contractors that can be hired to perform this service for us? Yes, there are. The couple of them that come to mind are using predictive modeling as a big portion of their process. That being said, I guess is a good time to plug the oh my heavens, the pilot study. So we are planning a training in April of next year, and we're Idaho Rural Water is partnering with our contractor that's putting on that training to solicit some folks willing to partner and be part of the pilot studies. If you're interested in that, talk to Shelly, and I can also get the information for the gentleman at 120 Water that's working on that one as well. So consecutive water systems, it depends on what your agreement with the consecutive system is. It might be your responsibility, it might be theirs. You might have to look into that relationship if it's not well defined. Now is probably a time to look at it if they're truly a consecutive system. So yeah, unfortunately, that's a big, it depends. But yes, those are still considered service lines. And so it depends on whether or not if they're a regulated consecutive system that samples under DEQ's purview, that might be a scenario where that public water system is on the hook for their own. But again, it could just depend on the contract between you and them and how that works out. So anyway, predictive modeling is definitely an option for you. That will need to be supported by some additional documentation. So if you just say, well, based on the predictive model, all of ours are non-lead, we're going to say, well, what went into the model to make that determination? And so that's where this verification method comes in. You're going to need to make sure you start compiling that documentation as you go along. There are some emerging methods that are mentioned in towards the end of chapter 5, somewhere around page 71 or 72. They're a little bit more of a wild card on whether or not they're effective and what their efficiency is and how successful they are. Make sure before you spend a bunch of money on somebody else doing something for you, you understand the limitations and you understand the output that you're going to get, so that you protect yourself from a situation where you just spent a fortune and still don't have much to work with. And there are a couple of studies out there that compare the different inventory methodologies, success rates, and that sort of thing. So if you're looking for that, I do have some access to that. So just, I guess, let me know, shoot me an emails and let me know how I can help. There's some more information as we scroll. Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to go that far. So replacement status is going to be important on the road because as part of the rule, eventually you're going to have to develop a replacement plan, a lead service line replacement plan. If none of your service lines are lead, then your lead service line replacement plan is pretty simple. But this is a good way for water systems to be able to track. Like if they know that both sides are lead, then they know they're going to eventually need to replace both sides. And so that's what this information is for, not necessarily a requirement. If you choose to leave it all blank, that's fine. Although I would advise to try to give as much information as you possibly can. So down the road, you don't have to redo any work that you were already in the process of doing. So this verification method, we've talked a little bit about it. It's very general because there are a lot of ways a water system can get at it. And rather than belaboring the drop-down box with a million different categories, Excel kind of limits you on how many you can put in there anyway. I chose records, visual verification, or other. Be aware, you're just going to have to put together a packet of information that tells us how you did that. So that's enough about that. Structure or service line type. This might be important for tracking. One of the metrics in the lead copper rule revision right now is sampling of school or child cares. So you're gonna want a way to help you track that. But again, do not worry about anything other than the inventory right now. That's your focus. Idaho is not seeking primacy for the lead copper rule revision. That's a really long story and we don't have time for that here today. But again, this is just another way for you to make sure you're tracking appropriately. If it's a single family residence, it should have one service connection. If it's multifamily, it may have more. So this might be a good way for you to track that. Say I have 4 service lines here, right? But I only have one GPS location. And then there's a couple other categories. So I added an other there for those non-drinking water related service connections so that you have a way to document those. And then there are some provisions in the current rule that you have to notify the consumer within 30 days if they're connected to a lead service line. So this is just a tracking for that if you've done that notification. Again, not something that you're going to be held to just yet. So if you don't find yourself wanting to fill this out, that's okay. Don't do it. And then we added this ability to track private side replacement so that if you you know that you need to replace it and you've got it scheduled, it was not scheduled, or the private side denied you access. And so you're not on the hook for making those replacements on the private side necessarily. Okay. So from the perspective of the rule, the way the rule reads is that you're responsible for letting them know that they have a lead service line if you know, and then offering the opportunity to coordinate that replacement at the same time that you're doing your replacement. Doesn't necessarily say that you have to pay for it. You can if you want. I can't tell you no. You have to document that you tried twice. You tried that communication piece twice, and either you got zero response, which counts as a denial, or they just flat out said, no, stay off my property. I'll shoot you if you show up. And then you can also put whether or not it was completed, and so then your next inventory is you're gonna update that service line and indicate that it's no longer lead. This is just an extra category, and then here, like I said, you can fill out as many as you want. Excel has something on order of 65,000 columns, so you have lots of room here to add whatever you want. Real quick, I got about 6 minutes left, and it looks like there's a couple more questions I need to answer. What I want to show you is, can you see these little dashed lines here? Somebody either unmute and say yes or type yes in the box.
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, that's going to be your print line. So that's going to tell you what the print page is going to look like. So in Excel, if you go up to the upper left and click File and then go to Print, I want to show that. So look here at the bottom, you have 64,524 pages. Okay, again, that is because this is all highlighted blue and there's information in every single cell where I put instructions or a drop down. So Excel thinks that it needs to print all of that. You want to make sure that you only print the pages that you want it to print. You need to constrain it by the number of pages. I have it set up so that it prints across and then down. So you can see here if this said, if this was number 1 Rose Way, number 2 Rose Way, and then when you get over here to the next page, it's going to show the rest of the information for that number 1 Rose Way. It's going to print across and then down. So page 1 and 2 is going to be the first page. So for many of you folks that are very small, that's all you're going to need to print. Be cautious with that. You're going to run out of paper and you're going to be really angry at me. So make sure that you check that when you're printing it. Also, you can also find that little bit about printing here on the instruction page. Make sure you're cautious about choosing what you want to print. And unless you're going to print it and put it in a notebook, you may not need to print it at all. Okay, so how frequent? Okay, first, I think my next question is, what is the deadline to complete and submit the inventory? The deadline, the compliance deadline is October 16th of 2024. Do not anticipate any grace or extensions of that. That's actually the extended date. Originally, when promulgated, it was due much sooner. So October 16th, 2024, no excuses. You got to have it submitted to us. We're putting together a submittal portal for you. That's coming. Please be patient as we work through that process. How frequently are we expected? Yes, development and construction definitely has a mind of its own. For right now, the way the rule reads, you're required to update Anytime you engage in a substantial lead service line replacement, so if you go through and have planned replacement of I don't know, blocks of area, after you're done with that construction, you would want to send us an updated inventory. The other time you're going to need to update that information is after your monitoring period ends. So if you're on 6-month monitoring, you don't have to submit that inventory update every 6 months. You have to submit it once a year. Okay. If you're on a 3-year monitoring period, you're going to have to submit that update every 3 years or certify, so long as they keep that in the rule. I can't promise that they're not going to change that part. It's up to the district to determine if a 2 or 3 foot lead gooseneck is considered as a service line. I mean, yeah, the guidance says typically a lead gooseneck is shorter than 2 feet. But again, make sure that you have some additional information, Matt, to back up why you chose 2 feet versus 3 feet. Like, for example, if you can show that, well, all of our goosenecks are 3 feet, that's just what we use because of X, Y, and Z, then that's adequate. But I would be cautious about just applying it to every scenario where you might find lead, so that you don't get yourself in a position where maybe you probably should have replaced those or called them out as service lines. And then, do we need to print hard copies? Not necessarily. You post files, I don't know what your population is, but if you provide it in a digital format, you don't necessarily need to print. The rule doesn't require that you provide a hard copy. You just have to make it accessible so that people can view it. So how you do that is up to you. If you want to print a single copy and laminate it and put it at your front desk and let folks come in and look at it, that's okay. The rule also doesn't require that you, at least insofar as I can tell right now, that you are required to print and provide those copies. Most municipalities have provisions where if customer wants copies, they got to pay for them, and that's okay too. It just says that it has to be publicly available. I tried to save the guidance PDF, couldn't download, buyer scan failed. Tondi, can you answer that question?
Yes, I'm gonna put it in with the evaluation. So they'll,
Okay.
when I send out the course evaluation, and it's gonna take a little bit to get everybody sent out, just watch, I will attach it as a handout. So you can get that DEQ'd thing.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay. So updating does occur based on your lead copper monitoring schedule. So if you're on a 3-year, you're going to provide that update every 3 years, unless you engage in activities where you're replacing lead service lines. You want to get that update out sooner, because there are some additional communication pieces that are required when you're performing lead service line replacements. Again, some of that's going to be subject to change pending the lead copper rule improvements. But generally right now, yes, based on your monitoring schedule. Again, if you're on a 6-month monitoring schedule, you don't have to send that in every 6 months. You just have to send it in once per year. Now I am out of time, folks.
Okay, are you done?
I could probably talk for another hour, because I know there's a lot of questions out there, but folks are probably wanting to get back to work. And but again, I'm happy to try to answer whatever questions you have. I know you've got more. Just make sure you're doing the best you can, and let us know if there's any needs that you have that we can. Bob, clarify if large systems are required to post a report on their website. If you serve 50,001 persons, yes, you're required to post that inventory on your website.
Hey.
Hey, Tondi, this is Shelley. Just to remind folks that in April, there will be free 2-day workshops for lead and copper and how do you do these inventories. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but they're mid-April. There's one in Western Idaho, Southeast Idaho, in North Idaho. They are offered in person and virtually, each one. So those dates are on our training calendar. Actually, Tawny, maybe you could send that out in the evaluation too, so folks can get those dates on their calendars. But again, there are 3 2-day workshops for free that DEQ is putting on. So make sure that you've got yourself and possibly another person or so to attend that workshop with you.
That's awesome. Yeah. I already sent out a couple of them without it, but it'll be in the training calendar. So watch that. If you look on the chat box, I'm going to stop recording. I want to thank Cassandra right now. And I'm going to stop.